Hey, welcome back to the Woodworking Talk Show. Hey, by the way, Ben, how do I sound today?
You sound great. Alert.
Yeah, see, I had an
with
issue. I had an issue last week. I was talking to Jason Hibbs, Bourbon Moth.
Yeah,
So I
he's
recorded. Oh, he's awesome. But I recorded the whole thing, except I didn't have my main microphone turned on, so it was going through my laptop. So the whole thing is just like this huge, echoey mess. He sounded great because he was sitting inside of a closet filled with clothes. What are you going to do? Anyways, before I get started, I wanted to thank all of you who signed up to my award-winning, not actually award-winning, newsletter after I plugged it last week. Head over to notesfromsteve.com to sign up. You'll get a newsletter delivered to you once a month right to your front door. And by front door, I mean email. And issue number 14 comes out August 6th. Don't miss it if you can. You have a newsletter, Ben?
I don't. I don't do a lot of these things that I don't. And I'm sure we'll get into it. But there's been so many times where I've had severe business FOMO about what I'm not doing.
Oh, I'm like that way all the time. Right now, it's with Instagram.
Yeah, at this point, I'm just like, there's so many things I'm leaving on the table, but that's the beauty of being a small business, is that you have to leave some things on the table.
You do.
You just do. Otherwise, you go nuts.
Okay, let me do this introduction sure. now that I've just kind of gotten off course here. Since 2013, Ben Uyeda has been making all kinds of things using all kinds of materials from his maker ranch out in the desert and posting videos on his channel, Homemade Modern. And the range of things he makes is quite amazing, from DIY hot tubs to live edge tables and floating beds. Floating beds, they float in the air, not on water. Although you might have something floating on water. I'm not
They
really sure.
have the appearance of floating, as the internet corrected me.
Oh,
They're not actually
right.
floating. I'm like, oh, you mean I didn't
it's
subvert
not
the
really
laws
it's not really a hover bed.
And here I thought I had subverted the laws of gravity, or thought that I could lie and deceive people into thinking that I did.
He's also made a house out of a shipping container. That one was super cool, and is renovating other spaces. His work has a playful, artistic bent, and he seems to love experimenting with materials and designs. One of my favorites is the skull-shaped pizza oven. He does, and here's the strange thing, we'll have to get into this. He seems to do all of his work on his knees. Hey, Ben, thanks for joining me.
It's really interesting, right? Like, that is one of the most consistent commentaries that I've gotten throughout the years. And it was like, look at this beginner.
Oh,
he
right.
doesn't even have a real workshop. And now it's like, look at this idiot. He's clearly kind of been doing this for a while at a professional level. Why does he still choose to do this way? And it's funny that it started out of necessity, and then the necessity became the thing that I actually enjoyed about it. Is I kind of like the minimalism of it. And there's certain things that I'll use giant robots and CNC machines that cost tons of money and are very capital intensive. But I like to pull it back every once in a while to just a floor and a few basic power tools. And I kind of think that's my grilled cheese sandwich. Just because you can cook. I know a lot of chefs that still don't mind making themselves a grilled cheese sandwich at midnight for a snack.
Sure. Well, I think that appeals to a lot of people too. See somebody on YouTube making something using handheld power tools and crawling around on the ground like a lot of people really do. I mean, most people who are casual builders of things probably don't have a full workshop at their disposal.
Yeah, it started with really looking when I was getting started, I was living in Boston at the time. And the realities of building in a dense city where the majority of people live in apartment buildings that often involve sort of walk-ups. It's like the difference of playing tennis on like a hard court versus clay. It's a different game almost. So that was the initial thing where my circumstances allowed me to connect with a certain group of, it's not the biggest group of woodworkers or makers, but it let me connect with a specific group that was dealing with the disconnect of they're watching a lot of content of people in, suburban house garages, and they're in a 600 square foot apartment with like a closet. So it's kind of the good news is that no matter what situation you're in, there's probably some other people like that are in similar situations. And when you're getting started, that's such a blessing because you're going to connect with somebody strictly by being honest about the context that you're in.
Yeah, if YouTube had been around when I was living in San Francisco, I would have been making videos on the rooftop of my apartment building because it's literally how I would build things. Is I had extension cords that would go out my kitchen window. We were on the third floor, so all I had to do is go up through the little escape, and I would be on the rooftop, and I could build things up there. You can always make it work.
Yeah. And then I also think it's because the multiple materials that I use, it makes it really hard to set up one workstation for everything, right? Like I've never invested in a really nice workbench that would be great for woodworking because I know I'm going to probably pour concrete, fiberglass, melt metal, and floor has always been the thing where I can stage it in and out. So I guess it's very much like, I think the fair criticism is that at times it probably seems much more like I'm prioritizing the content, which is 100% true. That's real because I don't really get paid for the things I make as much as it is the videos that I make. So my workshop has always been kind of a set first and foremost, and but there are some practical benefits of sort of working with a messy material, switching over to wood, and then back and forth to everything in between.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people don't understand about content creators. They see woodworkers and makers on YouTube is that it's the video is your job, really. The
Right.
making thing is the fun part of that, but it's really putting out videos is your bread and butter there.
It's the product.
So you mentioned your kind of minimalist aesthetic. It definitely comes through. It's always been that way. At least that's the way I perceive it as, even with the stark white background. You're even sitting in front of that stark white background right now. I remember from like your very earliest videos, and you started, I looked, 2013 was your first video. You've been around a while on YouTube.
Yeah, and it was funny too, because like my first videos were not even on YouTube. I put them on Vimeo because I
Oh,
never thought about really YouTube. I knew that video was where people were going. I have sort of a background in tech with more sort of web-based stuff, and raised a bunch of money for a .com. It eventually got acquired right around 2013, and when it got acquired, that's when I was looking to do, what I wanted to do next, and I wanted to go more hands-on. And so that was the kind of the passion part is I wanted to feel like I was actually making things and doing something physical and active, not sitting at a computer. And then the other thing that I sort of connected to was the opportunity that I sort of saw between, I would always look at blogs like Apartment Therapy
yeah.
or Dwell Magazine, but more and more I saw them sort of saying that their viewership was going down. And these kind of traditional posts of like, here's how to do something where it's a vertical scroll and a whole
Hmm.
bunch of images with like two sentences of text below each one, they were getting less and less traction on those. And that was when you started hearing that term pivot to video from all the media platforms. What's interesting is that how many of these big companies full of smart people didn't take that advice, which was really obvious. It was clear. Everyone was saying it and the numbers were right in front of them. But that pivot took so long. And when I was thinking about the intersection of what I was interested in and where there was opportunity, I didn't think of YouTube. I thought of video and design. And that led me to sort of posting on Vimeo. I think the sort of hipster aspects of my background sort of led me to the more obscure platform until I realized that like YouTube just didn't seem as elegant at the time,
Right.
and it seemed more noisy. And I was like, no, I want this curated thing. And then I was realizing, oh, Vimeo's great if you're building out a really cool website that's driving all the traffic to the video views, but you're not expanding beyond that. So when I went over to switch, 5 or 6 videos immediately over to YouTube and launched a channel with a bunch of videos all at once, um, then I sort of said, oh, YouTube will introduce my ideas to people that had never heard of me.
Right.
And I
Yes.
think because I started that way, I haven't had any of the kind of resentment towards YouTube as it's changed over the years. Because my first impression was them doing me a favor. One, hosting my videos for free, and then two, almost all of my videos in the first few years got more views than I had subscribers.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is amazing. This platform is outperforming me. It's giving me the audience, not me, not restricting me from that. And I think because that's how I sort of got into it, not looking at it as a thing, looking at it as like a gift, and realizing how hard it was to get views on any other sort of platform. I think that sort of started the foundation where obviously there's still frustrations. They change things that I don't understand as an individual, but it never really got to the point where it was discouraging or upsetting, because I was like, but they gave me most of my subscribers.
Right.
I probably earned like 20 to 30% of the 1.5 million subscribers, but it's not like I had a bigger platform that those people were finding me on. My web traffic was never over 1 million people a month. So it was them and their kind of tools that allowed me to sort of have this following base.
And you came in at a great time too, at 2013. I always like to think of about 2013 to 2016 as kind of peak YouTube. That was kind of the golden age of YouTube, when everybody was really ramping it up and people were making some good money. And yeah, your first couple of years really just shot through the roof. You were really doing well. Not that you're not doing well now. I don't. That's kind of a dumb way of putting it.
No, I think that is the thing, right? Like, and let's dissect that a bit, right? Like this idea of the golden age of YouTube, because it completely resonates with me. When you say that, I totally get it. Like, I feel the same way, but I'm not sure I think the same way. And this is sort of a conflict that I sort of deal with, is that from my perspective as a creator, it was the golden age of opportunity in YouTube.
You're right. That might be a better way of putting it.
But I think from a user perspective, it's only getting better and better in terms of, like, if you put in a search query now for, and I remember I did this. I searched for DIY table with pipe legs, right? That was like one of the first 3 videos that I did. And when I searched for that in YouTube in 2013, I think maybe 1 or 2 videos came up that were actually tables and actually used pipes. They weren't particularly good quality, and they were either really way too long or way too short. No voiceover, just kind of almost before and afters with a couple of steps in between, and not even a complete list of steps. So it was the golden age of opportunity, meaning that there was no supply, but there was clearly demand. What's I think happened now is that if I search that same thing now, I bet you I'm seeing 10 pages deep of like content that's probably better than the video that I made that did really well back then. So when I look at people like your previous guest, Jason from Bourbon Moth, the stuff he's doing is like so high quality, from the video to the designs and everything else. Now, it's probably beyond the DIY capabilities of most people. I mean, that guy's skill level is extraordinary, and like, we're so lucky to have people like that in the community. Excuse me. But early on, there wasn't a lot of options for fine woodworking. There was kind of Mark with the Wood Whisperer doing his thing. John Himes and Matthias were kind of doing variations of that, with definitely their own sort of unique spins on it. But there was kind of this group of more eccentric people that were all sort of owning kind of a sphere of a type of woodworking or a type of making. Obviously, Jimmy DiResta was always the person I think that a lot of us sort of remember as like being the first big weirdo that was really going from just sort of woodworking and DIY, but also doing stuff that was fabrication wise a lot more advanced than not what people were doing, but what people were showing on the internet. And I think what the golden age showed people was the opportunity. And the way I sort of look at new people that I see that are just blowing up is, I think our generation, and you came a little bit before me, but like me and like the Bobs and then later sort of Mike and Chris from our podcast, what we kind of demonstrated was, and I mean this sincerely, I hope what those, from a business standpoint, what my sort of work showed was that you don't actually have to be that good at making to be interesting and attract people's curiosity about things they could make. And there are so many more talented makers out there. And now what we're seeing is people that have a really solid woodworking background. People like Michael Alms comes to
Hmm.
mind. The stuff he's doing with plywood is just extraordinary. Is that you're seeing people with a lot of craft and maker experience seeing that there's opportunity from people that are way less talented than them on a physical standpoint, being like, well, I'm pretty good at this. Why don't I do this? And I think you know, they're probably a little bit later to the gold rush and your generation is the one that took the greatest risk in sort
Hmm.
of seeing something that wasn't proven. When you got started, it wasn't like people were saying you can make a living on this.
Right. I
The
think a
people that
lot
are
of
getting,
people,
yeah,
yeah, back then were getting into it because it was just a fun thing to do. People now seem to have a much more of a plan, and they see people making lots of money on YouTube and they think, well, I can do that. And it's interesting that you mentioned the searching for, a certain type of table or something, and how I think for one thing, it's kind of saturated to an extent right now with projects. I always kind of like to joke about coffee tables. Everybody makes coffee tables. If you search for
so many
coffee
coffee
table,
tables.
you're going to get 10,000 different coffee tables. But I think that search is becoming less and less relevant on YouTube. I don't see, even in my own channel, I can see that the amount of views I get from search is
It's low.
minimal. And those are all older videos, mostly people are searching for. But YouTube doesn't want you to find things through search, because that implies you're going to find something and leave. They want you to just stick around, and then whatever they serve up is, specially designed for you. So I think we're seeing a lot of people who are making content that tries to appeal to a much wider audience. Either they're doing that consciously, or they just kind of stumbled into it. And I think Jason is actually a good example of that. His videos appeal, I'm sure, to lots of people who aren't interested in woodworking, just because the quality on those is so good. It's just a
Extraordinary.
cinematic, it's fun, it's funny, it's engaging to watch.
The search thing is interesting, and I had a slight misunderstanding of search. So direct search is a pretty low result,
Right.
but the shipping container project really revealed some things that I hadn't fully realized about the nature of search. So when we did the shipping container house series, I didn't put it on Homemade Modern. I created a brand new channel from scratch, 0 subscribers, put up a few episodes, and then just launched it and posted about it on Instagram. It it gained off of 9 videos over 370,000 subscribers and did 20 million views on a brand
Wow.
new channel. And I was thinking, okay, I didn't promote it that hard, and my Instagram's not big enough to get those kind of numbers. I didn't really post about it on the other YouTube channel that much, and the videos that I did do to post about it didn't do that many views. So I'm like, how are people finding and discovering this? And I don't think it was because so many people were directly searching shipping container house at that moment, the video shows up and they watch it. What was happening, and in my conversations with my sort of YouTube rep, sort of support this in a abstracted way at least, is a lot of people had searched for shipping container houses over the years,
Mhm.
and they have a Gmail account, or maybe they emailed about an inquiry about a shipping container house. All their Google search history is all contained into their Gmail login and account. So Google has a idea of who they are and what they're interested in. And when they saw a whole bunch of new content that seemed to have a good amount of likes to dislikes and have a good amount of watch time and duration, meaning that in their evaluation, good content, they said, oh, remember that guy from like 3 years ago that was searching about things? This is kind of the best video we've had about this in a while. Let's feed it into him and his suggested views. So that's not directly search,
Right.
but it's building up. And that's why one of the reasons why I wanted to do the series from a business standpoint was, one, I was genuinely curious about shipping container houses as having a background in architecture. But when I looked at the search volume, there was a lot of demand. A lot of people, if you look on Google Trends, are searching for these things. When I look at the content that then sort of supplies, I wasn't seeing the coffee table result. I was seeing a very limited amount of high quality content that really explained the process.
Right.
And I think that's the way to kind of look at YouTube now. If you're looking at this from where are the opportunities, I think it's not just what's the most popular. Because if you look at what's the most popular, it might be, say, something like slime videos. But if you also look at what are people
Gonna
producing
make a
the most
fidget
content,
spinner, are you?
right? So it's that intersection between demand and supply.
Yeah.
And I think that's where will be consistent opportunities. Like right now, lumber prices are high. This might be a good time to show, hey, here's 10 creative ways to use MDF to make things that are actually look good, right?
Yeah.
So,
or just make videos complaining about lumber prices. That seems to be the thing people want to do right now. That's
yeah,
funny.
it's we've all seen way too many of the lumber memes, but and I guess it speaks to a real pain point though, because on one hand, there's a real distress about this issue that affects people's livelihood. And on the other hand, it's kind of for other people, it's sort of an annoyance of their luxury. But people joke about the things that are kind of also important to them too.
Yeah, of course. I want to put you on the spot here.
Go for it.
Okay. I was looking at your very first video that you posted.
The wine bottles.
DIY wine bottle. Okay, here's the question. You probably know what I'm going to ask. Comments are turned off on that video.
Yeah.
What happened?
No, I just didn't. I just never assumed that comments would be that valuable. I mean,
you started with the comments turned off.
Yeah.
They've never been turned on. Oh, okay. Usually that implies like, oh, something happened. This guy's turned off. Nobody can talk.
It's so funny. Like, I hope I've never. I don't think I've ever used the word community to my YouTube audience because I never felt that way. And I know that that's like people like a lot of my friends that do this, they really do treat it like a community. They talk to their people and stuff like that. I had a very selfish approach to the platform. And it's one of the reasons why I don't talk a lot on camera. I love doing interviews and stuff like that. I like going on other people's podcasts and talking.
You have a very different approach to YouTube.
Right. I feel like the podcast that I do with Mike and Chris is a very much a community media thing. We talk about what were our daily lives. We talk about our struggles. With YouTube, I always thought it's like more like publishing a book or the video short format video version of that. I've always thought of it as mostly a one-way communication type. And it's not because I'm unwilling to have it, it's that I wouldn't want to have a conversation with a friend on a walkie-talkie because I don't think it's the right tool for that conversation where you're saying over and out between everything. So asynchronous text communications with anonymous people, I've never found particularly an appealing idea. I've never been that active on Twitter.
That's so funny because I have the opposite approach. I've got a podcast that I'm doing with a friend of mine, and we talk to YouTubers on there, not woodworkers or makers. And it's very much kind of like your show. We don't chit chat a lot. We just get right to the interview and we talk to people. It's fun. I mean, it's lighthearted and everything, but we don't. Whereas on my YouTube channel, I try to do a little bit more of that community building.
Yeah, there's no right way to do it. But if you want to avoid burnout for the long term, the way that feels most right to you is probably your best option. So that's the other thing I always tell people when they're asking for sort of tips about getting started in something like what we do. And I think the mistake people make is they look at themselves as their own factory and not their own set of tools. Like when they look at themselves as a factory, they tend to try to maximize output no matter what that output is. And rather saying I think the more honest acknowledgement for most of us is we don't have the tools to do everything well. We have the tools to do some things really well and other things adequately. Mike from Modern Builds, I think, is so genuine and effusive when he talks on camera. Yeah. It seems absurd that that's a realistic portrayal of how he is in daily life as someone that sees him on a daily basis. He is the same off camera as he is on camera.
Yeah, you mentioned that you and I met at an airport a few years ago in Palm Springs briefly. It was real fun talking to you. And you mentioned Mike down there, and I was asking the same thing because he really liked that. And then I talked to him a few weeks ago for another project I'm working on. I should have him on this show too. Yeah. And he's exactly. He's got so much energy and enthusiasm. He's like, a 20.
He's a golden retriever. It's just like, it's a different personality. I'm much more of a Doberman. A little more stoic. So but that's a tool, right? Like that's
Yeah.
inherent to who he is. So it makes sense that he packages that into content because that's efficient for him and it's a good thing to have. It's an
It
advantage.
works. Yeah.
It's so much anxiety and work for me to be that kind of effusive in just by myself in a room talking to a camera.
And I can't imagine you just coming and starting a video. Hey guys, what's
Hey,
up?
what's yeah?
Doing
It's
all the YouTube-y stuff.
so I've early on, I think uh, I I was pretty committed to the idea of doing it in a way that was taking advantage of not where the greatest opportunities were for a platform or the best way to do YouTube, or here's the 5 best ways to make a video, smash that like button, do all those things. I always took the approach that me optimizing what I'm good at is going to be better than optimizing a platform that wasn't designed just for me,
Yeah.
right? So the platform is designed for what they think is the greatest good for that platform. Just because I'm using it in a non-optimal way doesn't mean I can't accomplish my goals with it. So even with like replying to comments and things like that, my rule is I do it when it's a very Marie Kondo rule. If it doesn't spark joy, I get rid of it.
Very good.
And does, having a lot of engagement in the comments help performance? Yes, it does. Does it enough to do something that you don't want to do? Well, then if that's the case, you're not really working for yourself, you're working for a platform. And
Yeah.
that's a gray area and a line that always needs to be navigated. But the best part about being an entrepreneur and and owning your own business is that you get to set some of the rules.
Right.
And the more you transgress onto that is the more where you kind of suck the joy out of the freedom.
Right. Right. And you have a number of businesses too, don't you? I know do some physical products. Are you still doing the finishing products? Make
Yeah,
finished products?
we've tried a lot of products. A lot
Hmm.
of them not worked out, and a couple of them have worked out really well. And our goal is to kind of launch 2 to 3 new ideas a year, give them a year to kind of see how they do well. We originally started by selling our own brand of clamps. We didn't do that well on it. We sold out, but the margins weren't that great. It's hard to get competitive manufacturing. They're heavy products, so shipping and logistics is kind of a nightmare. The product that I was totally wrong on, I thought the clamps were going to do really well and the wood finish would just be okay. The wood finish has done extraordinarily well to the point where our biggest challenge is sort of keeping the supply chains going, especially through COVID. It was just a nightmare trying to get materials and then packaging and switching things. But the way I kind of look at the sort of landscape of my work now is I have a good sized audience. But if I throw out just any piece of content, it's not going to do that well. It could do way less than 100,000 views. And if I have an idea that resonates with a lot of people, it'll do 1 million views. So I know that just me talking or me making and showing something will not have consistent result. It's not necessarily my determination of quality, but it's the audience's one, and they get to choose where they click and where they follow through. But when I think about that, if I think of myself as a YouTuber, that's a really stressful proposition to know that your videos take a certain amount of baseline time to sort of set up, produce, shoot, upload, and promote. But if your results are inconsistent and that's your whole business, that's a real stressful point of view. You live and die with the performance of every video, and you have a lot of self-doubt and all those kind of things. When the way I sort of look at it is I have the opportunity, if I have a good idea that resonates with people, to have it reach an extraordinary amount of people. If I have a mediocre idea, I have the opportunity for it to reach a football stadium size of people, which is a fallback, kind of amazing. So what that sort of tells me is maybe say less, or when you're doing something flippant, like right now I'm doing like a spray painting
Yeah.
campaign
Krylon.
with Krylon. And
Hmm.
a couple of the projects in the 4-part series are really interesting. The satellite dish is really
I
interesting.
was just going to mention that satellite dish. That thing looks cool, and I don't even think you
Right.
posted the video yet. I think you
Not
just kind
yet.
of
Yeah,
yeah.
it'll probably be out pretty soon. But some of the other ones were the one we just posted, not that interesting. It'll be useful for some people that are like kind of at the more basic level. But do I expect like my hardcore woodworking friends and maker friends that have a ton of experience to be really excited about a video where I do basic sort of furniture restorations? No.
Right.
So I try to sort of place like proper expectations is that's I wouldn't say that it's filler because it's still meaningful and it'll still be useful to somebody, but I'm not dying on the performance of that video. Now, when I publish something on these windmill blades, which is a project I'm really passionate about, and that video falls really flat, that'll be a little bit disappointing. But again, the reason I'm doing that one is because it deals with some questions about sustainability that I'm really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason for me to have sort of the other business outlets is, one, it lets me sort of control my own destiny to a certain degree. You never have that complete autonomy, but I know I don't always have something amazing to say that's worth millions of views.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe like 6 times a year, I have something that's really interesting to an audience that's bigger than the hardcore.
Do you sell any digital products of any kind, or not?
Not too many. I do it when it sort of makes sense.
What attracts you to the physical products, especially in this day and age where so many people don't want to do physical products because there's so much more that can be made digitally?
I'm not attracted to the idea because fulfillment's a nightmare. It's so much easier to sell something digitally.
Yeah.
I think where it does is when I see a gap in the market, and then when I talk to my sponsors about them maybe making the product, and they're like, well, we can't do it for these reasons.
Yeah.
With the wood finish things, it came from the frustration of getting so many questions about finishes. And there's people like Mark that do great videos, but then about sort of breaking down the differences.
There's too many options, too many. Where do you begin?
And when you go into even like a Home Depot, which is supposed to be like the user-friendly store, or a Lowe's, either one, and you look at the wood finish aisle, you don't see on the cans an explanation of where to use this. What you see are words like polyacrylic or polyurethane or, wipe on
and
poly.
all of the text is in like 4-point text. You're trying to read, what is this good for? What do I use it on? And it's a nightmare trying to figure out what's for what.
So people know that there's an oil-based finish and a water-based finish, and they know that there's all these polys and acrylics and thanes all sort of tied to them. And then it's more confusing because there'll be a polyurethane that's branded Verathane. There's a lot of redundant thanes involved with this. And what we sort of saw was that people just want something that's low VOC, that's easy to apply, that you don't have to have a professional sprayer for, and that they can understand immediately what it does. And so we said, simple finish. It's oils and wax. I think I've never been totally satisfied with Danish oil, although that's what I always sort of grew up with my beginner woodworking projects using. And, there's great products like Odie's oil and stuff like that, but they're sort of quarantined more into that kind of fine woodworking kind of audience.
Right. It's like boutique kind of stuff.
Yeah. Stuff that you would, if you ask someone at Rockler for advice, they'd probably, push you in that sort of direction. And so it was much more that we wanted something that was, a good product that performs really well, that was clearly labeled, that we could kind of push to the kind of prosumer market.
Right.
I'm never any illusions about like the fine woodworkers. They're already done their 28,000 hours of research. They're going to know what they're going to want.
Yeah. Plus, they've already found products they're going to just stick with the rest of their lives. They're not going to get anything new.
And the plant-based term has worked surprisingly well. I didn't realize how much that would sort of resonate with people. And it's not because it's anything proprietary different. There's a lot of linseed oil is plant-based, right? So it's not that we're trying to claim any sort of special status. But I think talking about the product in a way, explaining the application process in a way that isn't like this formula that is written by a legal team, but saying like works well with a rag. I like using a rag. Mike uses a brush. They're both right. So that's what's proven to be the sort of opportunity there. With some of the other products, like we just launched a cushion company, is we saw that we really like doing DIY sofa projects. And when you think about like the value of a DIY project, a coffee table, you could go to Target and get a clean looking coffee table with a better lamination job than probably any of us could do in our shops for what, like 60, 80 bucks. It's hard to compete with that on a DIY scale. But you look at the sofas at IKEA, a lot of the cheapest, I think they have like a $300 sofa, but it's just absolute garbage. But their first like kind of real sofas are probably in like the $400 to $500 range. Well, that's where suddenly, beds and sofas are where DIY projects kind of start to make fiscal sense if you already have circular saw, drill, and orbital sander. Then the challenge is, where do you source the cushions? So we saw that a lot of people liked our DIY sofa videos. They've kind of outperformed other categories. And creating a sort of cushion company was, well, that's the hardest part, is consistent sourcing of the cushions. Let's make the cushions. Are they the most comfortable cushions that are comparable to restoration hardware? Absolutely not. Or
Hmm.
can you get a really clean modern set of cushions that look as good as anything you would see in Design Within Reach, which is selling, $6,000 to $10,000 sofas? Absolutely. So, we just sort of saw that gap in the market, and we like making that kind of content. So we're like, all right, let's launch that product.
Yeah, one of the things I like about your content is the angle. You are consciously aware of sustainability and upcycling, recycling. I know this series you're doing right now is all about upcycling stuff from the hoarder house that you guys bought with all kinds of. You inherited basically a junkyard or a dump, and
It's
I
great.
guess you didn't inherit it. You bought
And
a hoarder's house, but hey,
yeah,
tell us about you call it the Maker Ranch down there, which is out in Joshua Tree, outside of Joshua
Joshua
Tree.
Tree, California. So Joshua Tree is a couple hours outside of LA.
Yeah,
It has a really amazing national park. It's
it's beautiful
just a,
down there. Just
it's
beautiful
so
down
unusual. It's where Dr. Seuss got his inspiration for how he drew trees. It's
there. Oh yeah,
where the band U2 wrote the album
yeah.
Joshua Tree,
I just
and
saw where
where
somebody got fined for digging up a bunch of Joshua trees down
they're
there
in danger now. So
last
yeah,
week. Yeah,
and I think it's where Jim Morrison from The Doors took a bunch of acid trips and
I was gonna
wrote
say
weird
probably
lyrics.
tripped out. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of this quirky spot. I used to always come here to go rock climbing on sort of breaks from college with friends, and just always just like how weird it was, but still a great place to meet up. Palm Springs is a great airport, was where
Hmm.
we first met, and then close to LA. So it all started with a commission for the shipping container house. Home Depot has been a long time sponsor, and they wanted me to build an entire house from scratch, which was, a lot of people are doing it now, but at that time was kind of a pretty big undertaking. And I was looking for places that would be visually interesting, but the land was still inexpensive. And so outside of a national park seemed like the right combination. I picked Joshua Tree and bought the land sight unseen. And I never lived at the container house. I stayed there for, days or weeks at a time, but it was always sort of a project. And so I rented a house that became Maker Ranch. My sister Jessie, who's the
And
the
you're she's
youngest of
in
my siblings, she
she's in
works
your
with me.
videos. Yeah.
Yeah, and she came with me, and then Mike from Modern Builds, who was in Oklahoma at the time,
Yeah.
he's like, "Well, that sounds fun. I'm renovating a bus. I'm going to come out and hang out with you guys." So it was
Do you
it
guys
was
live
very
together in the same place, or do you each have
for
your
like
own?
the first like 6 to 8 months we did, because
Mm.
I just rented the place, set up the Wi-Fi, and one thing that a bunch of YouTubers that make stuff
Bunch of
need is,
hippies.
yeah, commune living. Everyone just needs Wi-Fi
You're right.
and a grill and some tools and a lot of floor space. So um, I was busy building that. Mike ended up buying a house after he did the bus. Jesse bought a house, and then we brought Brett from Skull and Spades out, who helps with the sort of maintaining all the tools and with some production stuff. He bought a house, and now Rachel Metz, who's another sort of DIY maker, bought a house out here. And I think like people always say, like, try to find what you're sort of passionate about, and then you'll never feel like you're ever working a day.
Sure. Yeah.
I find that to be just complete and utter bullshit. Like, it's just not true,
Hmm.
because nobody likes, like, I like the subject matter of what I do, but I don't like all of the work. Like, I don't like accounting. I don't like meetings.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't like
There's always that
sales
part.
pitches. I
Yeah.
don't like sending emails. And that's no matter what business I've done, there's always been 10 to 20 hours a week of unpleasant work. For me, I always just sort of accepted that, and that's why I often encourage people to not go full time towards their hobby. It might be, if you can get a real efficient set of income for like 30 to 40 hours a week and have 20 hours to do what you want, not a bad work life balance. And the minute you sort of do something sort of full time is you pollute what you were curious and interested in, what you love, with a lot of like hustle work that's not always that much fun. And then you start to cross those associations of like, oh, now I have to do this because of this schedule, and Thursday is my best posting day, so I have to start making stuff on a Monday, when really I want to do something else on Monday.
Isn't this that
So
whole hustle culture just kind of driving you crazy at this point? It's just like everybody is like hustle every day, hashtag.
it doesn't drive me crazy. It makes me concerned for people's
Hmm.
mental health.
Right.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with hustling if you feel like doing it. But feeling obligated to do something that you're not optimistic about, instead of questioning why you're doing something, I think might not be the best choice. It could be at that time. Sometimes you do just have to suck it up and push through. But I think defaulting that to every time you're not feeling motivated, at least ask the question before you just assume, work harder, plow through.
Right.
Because that's a very unthoughtful way to live.
Hmm.
So it's not that hustling or discipline or grinding are bad things, but they are when you always use that as a fallback to not question, wait, why am I not that interested in this project?
Yeah, and when you start doing the same thing over and over, and I mean, I noticed that with my channel. We were talking about this before we started recording here, is that, you get to a point where you're doing the same kind of, I'm doing projects, so now I've got to change that up a little bit. I got to do something. So I'm still within this whole bubble of what my brand is, what I'm supposed to do, but I'm not targeted in the center of it. This is project video every Friday. This is what's happening, because I was doing that for a long time, and it just burns you out. And so now it's, for me, it's really interesting and exciting to do shows like this, even though I know the view counts are down on these things because it's a long format video. There's 45 minutes to an hour long. There's not going to get a lot of views, but the people who are watching these really enjoy it, and I find it very fulfilling, and it makes me excited to wake up in the morning and talk to people like you.
Work life balance is such an interesting thing. It's for me, it's less about how many hours of work and how many hours of fun. Is the opportunity to sort of do what you want is to bring more fun into work.
Yeah.
That's an inherently a non-monetary optimization decision,
Hmm.
right? The minute I chose to pursue design as a career way back when I first went to architecture school was the minute I decided. I knew if I went into finance, if I took my sort of academic background and applied that to finance, engineering, something like that, I would make a lot more money than going into design. The inherent
Right.
decision for design was to sort of, it would be nice to make less money, but do more of what I like. And what's great about that, and I think the most underrated part of that, is it makes me such a more thrifty spender. When I'm having fun at work, it's less of, okay, I just left the office. Now I have to get wasted, go to
Yeah.
Vegas, party, go to San Tropez, rent a
Right.
yacht, and do all these things. So when you're efficient in one category that doesn't really provide a lot of nutrition for your curiosity, intellect, and self-expression, you tend to seek it in other sources. So that might be the best formula overall, is to be really efficient in how you make money and then really expressive in how you spend money.
Right.
For me, I've always liked more of a blended approach where, can I have a little bit of fun at work, and then can we scale that fun or scale that interest or scale that curiosity? Um, and from there, on the economic side, as long as I'm paying my bills and saving money every year, which means that my economic situation is improving year over year, if I'm also having fun, like, it's kind of absurd. It's totally
Yeah.
practical and normal to expect more and to be hard on yourselves, to push harder and do more. But it's really absurd to vocalize that out loud to someone
It
else in a
is.
less fortunate situation. It's like, so we've, unfortunately, Steve, we're in this awkward situation where we have a lot of complaints that we feel that we really just want, oh, that's so freaking annoying. Like, oh, this changed, that's annoying. Oh, this is that. We have things to worry about, but we're in such an unsympathetic position
Yeah.
to
Well, it's one of those things where it's like, to me, there's nothing. The only thing more annoying than like negative comments on YouTube are YouTubers complaining about negative comments, because it's like, okay, I'm sorry, but this is kind of a privileged job here. For me to, oh, somebody was being mean to me on a video is hardly a complaint when there's people who have to actually work for a living, you know?
The other thing that I always like to remember is I was reading a book and it was just talking about like how we think human behavioral patterns are new, but they're really like very proven. So when they were excavating Pompeii, which got totally covered in the volcano,
Yeah.
um, they found that there was like public bathrooms.
Yeah.
And you know what they had written on the stalls of those public bathrooms? Your mom jokes. The exact same
Those some things never
crude
change.
hieroglyphic drawings of private parts. Like
What
the
are you
minute
gonna
there was
do?
public bathrooms, they're just established the behavior and it's
Yeah.
been consistent. Like that's just something people are going to do. People are going to laugh at fart jokes. They're going to draw crude things in public bathrooms. And when they're anonymous on the internet, they're going to comment wild stuff.
Your videos and your projects lately, you really, it seems like the Maker Ranch is a playground. And you seem to be taking on a much more experimental direction. I don't know if that's just my imagination or what I've seen, but I've seen a lot of projects that you're kind of coming up with that are out there. And you say right in the video, this is just totally an experiment. I just want to see how these things fit together and how this works. Is that intentional?
Yeah. So it's not intentional that I could write down this plan, but it's responding to something that I'm feeling. And the part of community that I do take very seriously is the community that I feel like I have with my other people, both, you know, so the nucleus of that would be Rachel, Mike, Jesse, and Brett, who I see on like a daily basis. And when I look at that, like Mike is so much better at YouTube than I am. He's a YouTube native. He grew up watching YouTube.
Right.
The majority, I'll watch shows on HBO. He watches shows on YouTube. I'll watch like Succession and these kind of like high-end nominated shows because
You old
I'm old.
man, you.
Exactly, right? And but he is so in tune with the way things are going with thumbnails and
Yeah.
tendencies and what kind of vlog formats and what music to put in. I'm not. So it's like I want to be useful to my community because that's where I get a lot of joy and satisfaction. And when I think about what I bring to the table, it's a certain type of curiosity that's outside of genres.
Yeah.
And that intersection is it's inherently who I am. So
And you
it's
experiment with all kinds of materials. And I think when I first discovered you on YouTube years ago, and it was probably close to 2013 or 14, was I kind of I thought of you as the concrete guy. You were
yeah.
really into concrete back then, and then that kind of changed to other things. And it's constantly evolving, the materials you work with and the projects that you make. And some of them work, some of them don't, but you're
Yeah.
trying it.
Yeah, and there's some strategy to it, but it's not totally, right? And I think this is the really hard thing for people to sort of get is they want to say you either have this mastermind vision or you're just sort of freewheeling it, when in reality it's always a combination of the two. So what I sort of look for is, first of all, what do I feel motivated? I can be very lazy at times, or I can hustle really hard, depending if I'm excited about the project. So I start with the motivation, knowing that if I'm motivated, I'm going to use me as my own tool a lot better. From there, I'd be like, okay, where is the Venn diagram of my interests with potential audience interest? And that's where the sort of experiments come in, is I try to find a middle ground. Is I'm going to do what I want. I want to work with windmill blades. I always feel like I'm living that meme of like nobody, and then me being like, let's
Right.
recycle windmill blades. And
That's
again, it's
so
like,
awesome.
right. So then I have to figure out like, well, what's the intersection to trying to make this something a viable business proposition to satisfy my own curiosity. And so if it hits and it goes big, and some of them done really well, like the solar powered shed was something I really wanted to do. The minute I saw that we had like battery operated outdoor lawn and garden tools, I was saying like, what would be so cool if you store your tools and they're charged from a solar panel and you never have to deal with gas for the lawnmower or anything like that. I so just wanted to do it. I pitched Home Depot so hard. Let's do this. Let's do this. Finally got it done. And we did that. So it was so specific to my sort of passions and interests in sustainability, prefabricated construction, and those things. But it hit a huge overlap with audience and was one of my best performing videos ever. There's other times where I experimented with robotic gardens where I want to like grow plants inside of an armoire that fall pretty flat. It was,
Right.
I'd probably spent too much time in Joshua Tree on mushroom trips, sort of thinking of something that was really clever to me, but just people weren't there yet. Um,
You had a very interesting way of making a mold one time. I think it was a concrete mold you made out of Legos, Lego
yeah,
bricks. And yeah, I probably shouldn't say Lego. Do you get people that ever say, "Don't say Legos"? You
I
know,
don't care. I
I don't
really don't
either.
care.
It's like you're like, oh, okay, your Lego nerd card just came up when you correct somebody for saying Legos instead of Lego. But that was a
They're
cool
right.
project.
Yeah.
That was really
And,
cool.
and so that's one thing that I saw too was I think they making videos, I think you can take it a few ways. Like I've always really admired Mark because I thought he had such a disciplined way of showing a user-friendly way to kind of do woodworking the right way. Not that
Hmm.
there's one right way, but like it was like a really great educational platform. And so he sort of used video to kind of for like proper instruction.
Yeah, he was
And
shoehorning in off of television
right,
woodworking. So that was like, because he didn't have a YouTube,
right.
any YouTube to back up, to as an example. So it was brand new.
And so I was thinking of it like more, well, what do I click on? And I'll watch videos about like how they weld railroad ties together
Hmm.
because the process is interesting. They put this clamp on and they pour in magnesium or thermite or something and light it on fire and it gets burns really hot and welds them together. It's not that I was interested in welding railroad ties as an application. I was interested in the anticipation of what I was going to see.
Hmm.
And it was that sort of what if kind of scenarios we're doing that. And there's times where we've taken that to sort of absurd levels. Um, but the other thing that I always thought from a sort of empathetic approach is I would think about the anxiety I would get about making a certain type of project. I get really anxious at the idea of doing dovetail drawers or
Me too.
something like that because like am I just going to not pay attention for 5 seconds and misalign that and then go, oh, new piece of wood?
Right.
And that's an anxiety. And I think if I feel that anxiety with the amount of experience I have, there's people with less experience that feel even way more.
Right.
And early on, I was saying when I just had a really crude circular saw, drill, and orbital sander, no sort of clamps or really anything, I would get really nervous about making just right angle connections with plywood. And so I would try to think like, well, if I have this anxiety, what's a way that I can make a crisp corner or something modular and repeatable in a way that I feel comfortable with, where I feel confident that the results will be good. And
Right.
I think that's why Legos are so fun is because they're so easy and kids are not if you gave kids hot glue guns and a bunch of random blocks and they had to glue them together and scrape the glue, they would not have the confidence to express themselves as they would with the Lego.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I would sort of justify doing these things is that the way you do that will open up people to do some things. It's not that people want to make a concrete backsplash or concrete furniture, but if you show how easy it is to get a 2 liter soda bottle, cut it with an
Yeah.
X-Acto knife, hot glue it together, and then make a concrete lamp, that process could lend somebody to make something, whereas the outcome might actually not draw them in.
Couple of questions here that'll be easy for you to answer, I'm sure. First of all, people watching this may wonder, or a lot of people may have wondered what your tattoos mean. I already know the answer to this.
So
Show your arm. Hold your arm up. Yeah, okay.
I didn't get my first tattoo until I was 37 years old. And I've always thought that tattoos were interesting aesthetically.
I was
And
53. I got my first tattoo.
that was your rebellious face.
And that was rebelling, right? It's like, I ran a marathon, damn it. I'm getting a
Yeah.
tattoo for this thing.
So what I often find is I'm not very organized and I'm always like looking around for tape measure and things like that. Now, I use this as a way of estimating distances. So the applications where so I basically looked at when I designed it, what was the fewest amount of lines where I could get every single inch increments? That's 1 inch, this is a 1/4 inch band, this 2 inches, 3 inches between here and here, and then so on and so forth. So by sliding my arm around, I can get every single inch increment, make a tick mark, and then this is 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, and 1/8 of an inch bands.
That is pretty amazing. Do you know
So
anybody else who has ever done anything like that?
a few other people have got them, but they're more literal. Mine's
Oh,
more abstract. So
yeah.
Wobie from Wobie Designs, the guy that recycles skateboards, really cool account. He has one where it's an actual ruler. Adam
Right.
Savage, I think, has an actual sort of ruler. My thought is I don't need the redundancy of an actual ruler. What I need is when I'm looking through a pile of circular saw blades, I can hold it up to my arm and see if it's 7 1/4 or
Yeah,
6 1/2.
exactly. Right.
Or that's the kind of thing where I can just be where it's like that 3/4 of an inch, sometimes depending on the teeth, if you're used to looking at a fine tooth blade or a jagged one, it can be deceptive of whether or not it's 6 1/2. So the reference ability is where the value is. And then again, when you're on a ladder and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
about that.
Well, and
Um,
it has a much cooler aesthetic, just rings going around your arm rather than a literal ruler running up and down. Everybody goes, oh, okay, I see. You just need to measure things.
yeah.
Now
Yeah.
you've got
So
something to talk about.
it's so funny that like when I posted about it, people went, that's
Yeah.
not accurate enough. You can't do, I'm like,
Shut
yeah,
up.
yeah, you're right. Like it is, it's not completely aesthetically
People have
driven,
been
but
measuring
it's,
things like that forever. I measure using the width of my span of my hand is 8.5
yeah,
inches. Just I know these,
I
distances.
pace things off when I'm doing architecture projects. I know
Yeah.
how much my steps are. So it's nothing's ever sort of pure or exists
No.
in isolation. It is aesthetic, it is vanity, but it also speaks to things that I do use. Do I use it like every single day as this critical part of my production? Absolutely not. But do I think it's like cool and I have come in handy a few times? Yeah, it's like a
One
pocket
of
knife.
So the other thing about your channel, and I've always wanted to ask you this: what's with the typewriter sound at the beginning? Ever since your very first video, you have done that as your opening.
I just did it and I just never changed it. Like it's just been like I there's so many things to worry about. And there's so many better ways I could do everything. Like
Well, no, now
it
it's your brand. You can't change that really because it's like you expect that as soon as you hear that sound come up. I think, oh, okay, it's Ben.
someday I'll just change it and not say anything and just change it. But it's like I so want to focus on the fun part. Like
Yeah,
I've had so many stressful, terrible jobs. Like my first job I think was actually it probably broke some child labor laws, but I was like a dishwasher at a restaurant and worked there for years. It was not fun. It was good money for what I could earn at the time,
yeah,
but
I've
it
done
was
that work too.
brutal.
Yeah,
I've done every service industry job, construction jobs, roofing in the summers of California. There's
yeah. I think
so
we've both been through the
many,
same track of those kind of crappy jobs
yeah.
when we were younger. Yeah,
It's like, and then what I found is with sort of earlier entrepreneurial things, it's really easy to ruin your own life. Surprisingly easy, even when things are going well economically, status wise, recognition wise. It's so easy to get hung up on things that aren't really moving the needle.
right.
So now the downside of having that self forgiveness to kind of not change everything in an optimal way is you have to be comfortable with other people that are paying more attention to detail surpassing you.
Mm.
And that's a trade-off that you just have to be really comfortable with. Like,
Yeah, I
and
think
it's,
especially on YouTube, you have a lot of that, and I think that I've definitely gotten past that myself. But I think every YouTuber at some point is seeing like other people coming up who are they're paying closer attention to the algorithm. They know how to make better thumbnails. They know how to they know how to do YouTube better. I don't even know how to turn on the right microphone when I do like this show, and I've been doing this for 13 years.
and I find that optimistic, right? Like when I look at this newer group of YouTubers that are just doing extraordinary work, it I'm not saying that I never have sort of FOMO or I never have any sort of like, "Ah, how are they doing
Mhm.
that? How are they doing that?" There's tinges of that. That
That's
happens.
normal, yeah.
But the minute I feel that, I'm like, I try to call myself out on it and be like, how can I say that I'm interested in providing great information so that more people feel empowered to take control of their physical lives and make the things around them? Inherently, I think most of us agree that the world would be better if people cooked more of their own food, relied less on other things, knew where their ingredients for the things they consume came from, and felt empowered to customize things to fit their specific lifestyles.
Yeah.
That's the collectively what all these new people coming into this space are adding to the probability of making that easier and easier and easier. So
Yeah.
the library that we're all contributing, this YouTube library of maker content, of which me and you are an early but small part of the overall landscape, that's amazing. And it
Yeah.
feels good to be part of a collective sort of movement towards these
I
things.
totally agree. I'm totally on board with you. And it's one of the reasons why on this show, I want to talk to a lot of the newer YouTubers, because I think so many of us have heard so much from, I'm not that I won't talk to old guys like you, but my first guest, I wanted it to be, I interviewed Shara from Woodshop Diaries, just
Oh
because
yeah,
to me
yeah, it's
she
great.
represents like this newer generation who are just really enthusiastic, and she is just cranking out the projects on a weekly basis. And I'm like, man, that is just amazing to see that. So it's really
The,
cool.
the the quality of content on YouTube is extraordinary.
Oh,
And the density of information, the specificity. I was looking at Works by Solo.
hmm,
He's doing less woodworking, but he's filing patents. He's like, to see that guy's journey from where he's gotten to, or someone like Wobie Designs, Ben Pake,
right.
to go from just like cycling skateboards and posting about them on Instagram to a channel that now supports him. Johnny Builds, Industrial Maker,
The list goes
Crafted
on and on.
Workshop,
It's amazing.
and
I have a list I've been keeping, and it's like I'm like up to 200 now. So there's not going to be, there's no, fear of me running out of people at least to talk to on this show.
and it's going to get better and better and better. I'm
Yeah.
so optimistic. We're gonna see someone build like or even someone like Alex Steele that's brings blacksmithing
Hmm.
into the equation with an incredible amount of energy, great on camera skills, like Master for Knowledge, which is just like incredibly frightening to see how knowledgeable somebody can be about something at such a young age. It's just going to get more and more great from a societal library standpoint. We're building a free library of interesting stuff that solves a lot of problems, and solves a lot of problems that probably aren't really problems. But the coffee table example comes to mind. But I think that's the part that keeps it really fun and exciting. Is it's really nice to know that I'm a part of this community, that I help sort of build out this stuff, that I've made great friends along the way. And when I have something important to say, like about shipping container houses or something that's a thing, I can do it. I can fund it. I can make it, and I can reach a lot of people with it. If I do something about sustainability, so as I look sort of now, I kind of look at where can I be useful in this kind of broad library building. Is if you started out writing mystery books, and then there's suddenly a lot of mystery books on the shelves, maybe you switch genres.
Yeah.
And those are the sort of the questions that I'm constantly going through. And
I think
right
that's
now
a
I'm
smart thing to
yeah,
do. That's exactly where I am right now too.
yeah.
And with that, I want to thank you for joining me on this brand new show. It is the Woodworking Talk Show. I don't know.
Woodworking Talk Show.
Well, there's a lot of discussion about, people have told me that it's not a very creative name, but I think it just kind of describes what. So I'm getting a lot of
Hey,
suggestions on what it
we
should
called our
be.
wood finish that was simple to use, Simple Finish.
Simple finish. It just
In,
says
in
what it
a
is.
in a world of Googles and Yahoos,
I
and
know.
like simple and precise is not bad.
I know. Anyways, please check out Ben's channel, Homemade Modern. I'm sure you already know Homemade Modern. Of course, I'll include a link down in the description for you to check it out. And he's got so many cool projects over there. I really do hope you'll give it a shot. And thanks again for joining me.
Thanks, Steve.